This is Designing for Equity, where we give firm leaders smart, real-world strategies to build inclusive cultures, advance women in the profession, and make work fair for everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Katherine Porter, and today my guest is Jon Hirst. Jon Hirst, welcome to the show, and can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, Katherine, it's so good to be on here with you. And yeah, my name is Jon Hirst, and I run a company called Innovation and Mission, and we provide fractional chief innovation officer services, mostly to nonprofits. So what that means is essentially we are taking the role of chief innovation officer that can be very large and kind of overwhelming role for a lot of nonprofits, and we're making it more accessible, more affordable, and also at a pace that fits their kind of pace of change.
So what are the kinds of projects that you help nonprofits with in your role as a fractional CIO?
So what we tend to do is it tends to kind of take three forms. Either we're building a culture of innovation, so we're kind of doing that long-term work, setting up a culture that will allow them to change as opportunities arise. But that's usually for organizations that are in a really healthy place, right? Where they're not needing to change immediately, but they're wanting to build for the future. Another scenario is when we're really working on projects where there's a huge transformational project they're in the middle of right now, where they know that this project is going to reframe their organization in a big way. And so we do that. And the third scenario is more the I'm being disrupted now scenario, right? Where organizations may say, we are in the middle of major disruption. Things are changing fast right now, and we need to kind of immediately go into innovation mode to really identify how we move forward in light of major things that are happening.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of that going around right now, a lot of volatility and uncertainty,
Yeah.
and especially, AI. Everybody's talking about AI and how that's a huge disruption. I would imagine it's not all that different in the nonprofit space.
Especially when you think about education and media, and you think about things that are just being disrupted very significantly, like you said, by artificial intelligence, or you think about geopolitical things and all the changes, in countries around the world and how they're doing things. Of course, that affects nonprofits significantly in lots of different ways. And so, yeah, there's lots of change that needs to be adapted to for sure.
Yeah, so I think you have the right service at the right time. And I know when we talked earlier that people hear innovation and there's always a little bit of resistance, or a lot of resistance can be. How do you manage that?
Yeah, well, there is always a sense of leeriness about change, right? And innovation is fundamentally, it's not focused on the change, it's focused on the new, renewing, or reimagining thing, but that requires change, right? It's part of the process, even though that's not the focus of it. And so I think what I found are some of the key elements that address or really deal with this resistance to change struggle is number one, the more people in you involved, I think the less resistance you're going to have. Meaning that if you build a culture of innovation where anyone with an idea has a pathway for that idea to grow and thrive, all of a sudden the change that everyone's seeing is change they thought of themselves, right? It's change that everyone brought about rather than change being imposed on them from two or three people sitting in a room somewhere that they weren't even a part of, right? So I think that's a really key thing. And then I think the other one that I've noticed is just a focus on our end users, on beneficiaries, on the people that we're trying to serve, right? If we're focused on the people we are serving and they have a certain problem, challenge, or opportunity, then if we have to change to better serve them, it doesn't feel so awful because really it's responding to their needs. And when you respond to someone's needs, you're desiring to help them. And so change that's all about helping other people is way different than change for change's sake, right?
Right. Yeah, I think knowing the why behind it, any kind of new process or innovation is absolutely key to its success. And I also think that people just want to feel like they've been part of the process, even if you don't go with someone's idea. Sometimes just being part of that conversation can really help build buy-in to change. I don't know if that's been your experience.
Absolutely. I think most of the time people want to be heard. they know that not every idea they have is going to be that $1 million idea or the next thing we're going to do, and that's fine. But I think people want to be heard. I think, I know your focus is diversity and inclusion and equity and all those challenges that we're working on to try to incorporate better into our organizations and to represent people better. And I think that this process of listening to people is a huge part of that. And I think innovation can actually be a huge tool to include more people. Because if you really tell people that everyone's ideas are important, and if you really listen to everyone's ideas and provide them with a pathway to have them experiment with those ideas and try them out and brainstorm them, then all of a sudden you're including people that have never been included in the process before. Right? Just because maybe they didn't have a certain role or they weren't at a certain level in the organization or they weren't part of a certain team. By doing that, one of the examples I love is a Best Buy example. When flat screen TVs were first coming out, they were delivering them, right? Obviously, Best Buy delivers to your home,
Hmm.
your equipment, whatever it might be, and they were breaking a lot of the flat screen TVs because, especially in the early days, they were a
They're
lot a lot more fragile, right? Yeah, exactly. And so one of the drivers developed this thing that he called the TV taco, which was essentially just an extra layer of foam protection around these flat screen TVs that allowed him to deliver them and break fewer of them. Well, it was an amazing innovation, and one of the VPs at Best Buy ended up seeing what he had done and instituted the TV taco on all the trucks, right? And they probably saved millions of dollars in
wow.
broken equipment by listening to one particular driver delivering in one city, in one neighborhood, somewhere in the world of Best Buy and all of their organizations.
I love that story. It's so true. We really have to create that space because you never know where a good idea is going to come from. And so I think you have to give Best Buy credit for actually creating that path to move that idea up until it became the standard practice. Because that's always a challenge as well, right? Somebody has an idea and they might tell a few people, but it never goes anywhere. So that was great
And
that happened.
and that's one of the key reasons why innovation is such an important function in the organization because really all that innovation is as a function is the pathway that ideas travel on, kind of like a freeway. The innovation function makes it so an idea can go from someone's brain onto paper into a brainstorming session and through a process of ideation, experimentation, prototyping, scaling, and then rollout, right? But that doesn't just magically happen, right? It has to be intentionally fostered. And so the innovation function makes that process possible.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. You're really describing the design thinking, right? The five stages, and I feel like that's a great way to approach just about anything, and especially with people problems. I mean, it might look a little different, but um, how do you think or like equity and inclusion? How do you think design thinking fits in with that? I know I have my opinion, but I'm curious to hear what you have.
Well, I think the biggest way is through empathy gathering, right? A key part of design thinking is empathy gathering, and that's just a fancy word for talking to people.
Yeah,
But you're not talking to them just to do a survey or which of these five do you like better, right? You're not doing that kind of talking. Empathy gathering in design thinking is all about asking these very intentional questions, like tell me about a time when, or when did you do this and have a good result, or how have you seen this thing or this process or this activity impact your life in a certain way. And when you ask those questions, you get this deep, empathetic insight into how the people you're trying to serve are feeling about something, where they're struggling, where they're enjoying it, what they're getting hung up on. And that then goes into that design process, right?
yeah,
And if you're doing empathy gathering well, you're doing it across a diverse set of beneficiaries. You're not just talking to one profile of person, right? You're saying, who are all the people involved in using this product and engaging with it? And how can I engage with a really diverse set of them and get all their feedback and then design then appropriately?
yeah. I think is especially important when the people who are in the room making the decisions, who, and when it comes to equity, tend to be male and pale, especially in law
Yeah.
firms. And whereas the people that are having the actual lived experiences are women, people of color. So you have to develop that empathy. So I think that's a really important piece when it comes to equity or any kind of change. And that's what makes design thinking, I think, such a powerful approach.
And one of the reasons why I think innovation and things like design tools like design thinking are so helpful is that most people who run companies or businesses or nonprofits, really, it's the same. They started out with a vision, with a dream, with an idea, right? And they tended to be fairly intuitive founder types, right? They see a problem and they intuitively realize they have a solution for that problem, and so they go at it. And a lot of times they don't do a lot of those kind of things like empathy gathering. So they tend to be very intuitive, very vision driven kind of people. Well, as these organizations develop, they're really basing a lot of their understanding of who they're serving based on that initial founder's intuition and vision. But now you're 20, 30 years later and you've not gone back and asked some of the questions. Who are we serving? What are they like? What are their problems? What are their challenges? A lot of times we're still going off that original intuition. And so this process of innovation challenges that, right? It says, no, 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 it was great that the founder had that vision. It was great that they intuitively saw the problem. But we have to constantly be rechecking that and reaffirming that and modifying that as people change.
Yeah, exactly. People change, as we were talking earlier, the world changes. You have different social and political contexts that it seems like, especially now, it's just evolving constantly, right? So I think it's always good to go back, but I think that's something a lot of organizations have a hard time doing. I know when we talked earlier, you talked about nonprofits being, people, especially when they have their donors, they're really invested in a particular process or doing things a particular way. In law firms, it comes out as more like, we've always done it that way,
Mhm.
right? And so how do you address some of those challenges?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few issues that tend to be behind the we've always done it that way kind of response you might get, right? So, one of them I think is reputational risk. And this is an area where nonprofits and law firms actually would have a lot of very similar feelings.
Yeah.
And because nonprofits really, they live off their reputation as doing good in the community, right? Doing good in the world. If
Yeah.
if a new program were to somehow do something that put that reputation at risk, nonprofits react very strongly to that, saying, no, 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 we don't want to do anything that would negatively affect the value and the good we're doing, right? So, and I imagine in many ways law firms would be similar and a lot of business would be similar.
Definitely. Yeah.
So what I think we have to do in that situation is we have to assure our staff and other stakeholders that the innovation process isn't just this wild, crazy, shoot from the hip, try
Mhm.
anything, no matter what the costs kind of process, right?
Yeah.
We run these very controlled experiments in safe sandboxes where we try it out, right? We don't try it out in the biggest scenario in the biggest stage ever first, right? You
Yeah.
try it out in this little spot over here that's, cordoned off and, people that are willing to be part of it and say, yeah, yeah, I'll try something new. That's no problem. And you try it there. And if it works, you try it in a little bigger space. And if it works, on and on and on. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times when we assure our staff and our beneficiaries and our stakeholders that we're going to do that, a lot of the resistance goes down because
Yeah.
they don't feel like, oh my goodness, you're going to do something that puts our whole reputation at risk because you wanted to try something new, right?
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes to the culture of innovation that you were talking about too, is that idea that, okay, we're just going to experiment. And if it doesn't work, we'll do something else, or if it needs to be tweaked, we
Sure.
can do that. And so I think that creates that culture and where you're, more willing to try something because it's just an experiment, right? It's a
Yep.
lot less scary when it sounds like an experiment than when it sounds like a new policy or a new way of doing things, new process or something like that. But it's like you said, being enforced top down.
Yeah. One of the other things I think that it helps to do to address that, we've always done it this way, is restructuring of incentives. So many times our incentive structures are set up to incentivize what currently is happening.
Hmm.
Meaning, so it could be pay, it could be reputation, it could be status in the organization, but a lot of those things are designed around what's already working, right?
Yeah.
If you're a salesperson, right, you're rewarded by selling more, and what sells tends to be the thing that is tried and true, that everyone knows works well, that delivers good value. So if you're gonna be an innovative organization, you have to incentivize, for instance, a salesperson being willing to sell a new product, right? That isn't tested or that doesn't have a million customers or whatever the case. In the nonprofit world, the incentive structures are not so much about like sales, for instance, but they are about delivering value in a community, right? And so if we're working in a community somewhere in the world delivering good in some way, the incentive structures are all about the impact. How much impact are we having? So how can we incentivize trying something new that doesn't yet have proven impact, but might be very impactful? Right? We have to do that in different ways.
Yeah, I would think that's where the experimenting and start small and
Yeah,
build from there, right?
that's right.
Yeah, and I know law firms is the same thing. It's a lot of reputational risk. It's a lot of the partners are already making a lot of money. Or I always say there's one model of success in law firms. At least that was my experience. And if you don't fit that model, you're not going to go up. And so I think it's really important to kind of take a look and be like, what is it that we're doing that is stopping us from getting the result we want, whether that's equity or more good in the community. Yeah, that is the way we've always done it, but and the way we've always done it means, for inequity situations that only a quarter of our partners are women. What is happening? And then measuring, are we getting the result that we want? Is that something that's true? I would imagine that's true in the nonprofit or any innovation space.
Well, yeah, I think that one of the key parts of innovation that tends to get overlooked, but is really the payoff, is the learning, right? One of my mentors always said, the ROI in innovation is not more money or more people or more impact. The ROI in innovation is learning, because when you innovate, you're innovating to learn if something works. And so creating environments or places where you experiment, but then you share what you learned, and then you apply that in different ways within your organization. I don't know about you, but there's in every organization, there's always a few lifelong learners. These people that are always going to workshops and reading books and
That's
sharing.
me.
You're one of those people, okay? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I tend to be one of those people too, and I think those people tend to gravitate to new things, right? So that's probably why we're talking. But that tends to not be a corporate or organizational culture of lifelong learning. It tends to be isolated to a few people, right?
Mhm.
So if we can move that from just one or two people in the organization to being a organization that says, not only are we going to allow you to experiment, but we want to hear what happened. What
Right.
did you learn? And what can that teach us so that we can be better at doing the work that we're doing?
Yeah. And I think another way to combat that we've always done it this way, or this is the way we do things here, is to kind of look at and measure that impact, measure what's happening now. In equity spaces, it would be like, are we getting more diverse candidates? Are our candidates moving up into leadership roles and are they staying with, are they remaining long enough to advance? And so that's one thing to measure. And then that kind of it helps you define the problem. Like it complements that empathy work. I think it's the data, right? Like what is actually happening in terms of the data. Is that something that applies for in your work too? You measure kind of what is happening.
Sure, sure. In nonprofits, we're always measuring different kinds of impact. So there's a lot of outcomes measuring in nonprofits. So here's the situation in a community, in a place that a nonprofit is working. Here's the transformation they'd like to see, and are we seeing evidence or indicators that those communities are seeing that kind of transformation? That's really the lifeblood of a nonprofit, in the sense that most donors, whether more institutional donors or individual donors, are looking for those kind of indicators, right? They want to see that here's the good you say you want to do in the world, and show me that it's happening in some way, right? And so, the role of innovation then is to say, okay, those are our outcomes, and those are the indicators that we're measuring against. What are new ways that we could affect those outcomes? So sometimes I think you'll find it in a nonprofit, especially, that we get stuck in an outcome area, meaning our programs are not having the effect we want. We're not seeing change. And then we have to go, okay, we're not seeing the change we want to see. What can we try differently? What are the reasons why that change isn't happening? It could be an external impact or an external factor, something's changed in the community. It could be something in our program, right? It could be something that we're doing that just really is not working well. It could be new effects that are coming into the community, new impacts that they're facing that are causing things that used to work well to not work well, et cetera. So that's again where innovation thrives in saying, hey, how do we increase the impact we're having, especially in places where maybe the thing we were doing before is having less and less of an impact.
So when you come in as a fractional CIO, what kind of signs are you looking for that can you kind of tell like, okay, we have to do some work just to make innovation acceptable here, or versus like, okay, they've already got this culture, let's roll with it. What do you see when you come into a role like that?
Yeah, when I come in, I'm usually looking for a few things. So I'm looking for the trust factor, right? So is there trust among the board and the CEO and their leadership team, the leadership team and the middle management, right? Those are key layers there. Do we see a lot of trust? If trust is low, then that really means there's a lot of work to be done, because innovation can't happen in low trust environments. So I'm looking for that. I'm also looking for just the learning environment. Is this a place where people are learners and are rewarded for learning? Like a lot of organizations, they have brown bag lunches, and they're reading books together. They might have book clubs going on. You can just see indicators that these are places where people are learning together, and that's just a ripe environment for innovation. If there's none of that going on, then that really is an indicator that it's probably tough to introduce a new idea, right? And then I think really it's just then the empathy towards the end user, towards the beneficiary. If it's an organization that really cares about what the people they're serving think, that makes all the difference in the world, right? But if they really don't ever ask, they say, we do our thing, we give it to them, we don't really ever ask or really, it's not that they don't care, because everyone cares at one level, but their care doesn't affect their behavior, right?
Mhm.
If their behavior isn't a behavior of how is what we're doing helping you, right? If that's not evident, then that's also an indicator that there's some work to be done before innovation can really happen.
So what do you do when you walk into a situation where there's low trust and not a lot of learning happening?
Well, I think having big speeches and introducing big campaigns doesn't change that situation much. What makes a difference is doing it, is embodying it, is being it, right? So you start a book club with a few people that are willing. You run an experiment with a few people that are willing. You work on a specific trust relationship. Like a key one, of course, is the board and the CEO. If that one is challenging or weak,
Yeah.
you say, hey, to the CEO, you say, as a chief innovation officer, what can I do to help you build more trust with your board, right? How can I do that, right? So you embody it in your activities and do it very intentionally, and then you show the rest of the team those things. So you take that little embodied activity and you put it on display for the whole organization. And you say, see this? If you'd like to
Yeah.
be a part of this, we can do more of that, right?
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. So when you come in as an innovation officer, are you met with a lot of, well, we want this change now or yesterday? Do you see that a lot where there's like this disconnect between we want things different now and all the work that needs to get done to get to that?
Well, absolutely. We live in a microwave culture. We have a whole bunch of impatient money, and we have an expectation of immediacy, right? And so that's always a challenge. And so
Yeah.
this is where expectations become really critical. One of my key jobs in the innovation role is to set expectations. We want to expect impact and change, but especially if we're walking into a low trust environment or a low learning environment or an environment that isn't very empowered, it's going to take a long time. It's
Yeah.
not a fast turnaround. Now, just like the book, I forget who wrote it, but The Speed of Trust, right, was a book that came out. If there's high trust, we can expect results a lot quicker. So part of it is to diagnose the situation. Say, here's the environment we're in here. The expectations of that environment are this. So let's not move forward unless we're comfortable with the fact that it could take a few years. Or maybe if there's super high trust and there's readiness to move, we could say, in 12 to 24 months, we could see some significant progress because everyone is just ready to go, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's really the key in my mind.
That's a huge, it must be a huge range too, of
Oh,
walking into,
sure.
yeah, and really visible.
Body too. I think some organizations have pockets of super high trust and
Hmm.
super speed when it comes to innovation. And they might have another division or department just right next door,
Yeah.
super low trust, right? Because these things tend to get siloed so much, you could like I've noticed that in organizations I've worked at, I've seen places where people look and go, why is it happening so quick over there? And why are we
Mhm.
struggling so much? Well, it tends to be some of those factors, right?
Yeah, I think that's really key is doing the work before you do the work kind of thing. Like I know I always think like sewing. There's so much of sewing that's not sewing, it's
Mm,
cutting out the pattern, it's ironing the pattern pieces,
sure,
washing the fabric, ironing the fabric. Like it just takes
absolutely.
a long time. And when you want to just sew, look, I just want to make this. And so yeah, it's one of the reasons why I like crochet, because you pretty much just pull out the yarn and start. So
Mm,
but I think that like getting that mindset, communicating that mindset to the people you're working with, that hey, this is a lot of this isn't going to look like innovation. It's going to be, but it's all laying that groundwork so that you
right.
can have innovative ideas that actually work for your organization. So
That's right. No, I think the work before the work is hard to get your head around because we're so
mhm.
tangible as people, right? We see a building and we think about the building. We don't think about the architect and the planning that they had to do for that building. We just think about the bricks and the wood and all the different things. And the same is true in organizations, right? And we think
Yeah.
about the product or the service or the engagement with the customer or the interaction with the beneficiary in a nonprofit. But we don't think about all the stuff you have to do, the plumbing, right? The infrastructure that you have to build in to make that the kind of experience that you want it to be.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why it's really important to involve people from different areas of the organization, because then they have more of an appreciation
Right?
for the process. And like we talked about earlier, it's all about what's our why? Why are we doing it? Who are we helping? And how does this like fit into that whole kind of that arc of innovation, I guess
Yeah.
I would say.
No, the issue of diversity is such a huge one because whether it's age, race, gender, on and on and on, the every one of the people that is involved in our organization, from any stakeholder group in whatever their role is, they all have a different perspective, and that perspective is critical to the bigger picture. But like you said, most of our decisions as organizations are made with a much smaller set of perspectives than the full set that's being affected by what we do, right? And I think my hope is that with the innovation process, we are essentially creating pathways that allow all those different perspectives to be part of these solutions.
Yeah, and I think that makes solutions and innovative ideas so much more successful. So, well, I have one question I always like to ask towards the end, and this has been a great conversation, but what's one strategic move you think that leaders can make to foster that culture of innovation?
And when I think about that kind of top line change? Right? What's the big thing? The one I always think of is a simple phrase, and I call it a yes if culture. So most cultures are no cultures, right? You say, I've got an idea. They say, no, we don't do that.
Especially lawyers, we like to say no a lot.
Well, sure, that's maybe part of even how you go
Yeah,
into trial, right? You're doing a lot
right.
in a trial. But so most cultures are no cultures. Sometimes they realize, oh, being a no culture has really downsides, so they become a yes culture. But the problem with a yes culture is that yes just says indiscriminately yes to everything, and scope creep happens, bad ideas happen, and also a lot of disappointment because a lot of times the leader will say, yes, that's a great idea, but they don't put money behind it. They didn't really like it. They just wanted to encourage people to think, right?
Yeah,
So what I always encourage is I say, if you could do anything, implement a yes if environment. You say, where you're saying, yes, I love that you came up with that idea. If you take it through this process.
yeah.
So you discipline your yes around a process that allows you to identify which things really fit and which things really meet the needs of those you're trying to serve.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of yes if. It's very empowering, I think, because it's still recognizing that there's a kernel there that's a great idea, but we also recognize that we can't just do it like blindly, right? We have
Yeah,
to be intentional about it. So,
right.
well, I have loved this conversation. I knew I loved our earlier conversation. This has been just as good. So, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to, like, any last words for us?
Well, I guess I would just say to those people out there listening who maybe are a little frustrated by their environment, where maybe it's not as innovative as they wish. I think what I would encourage people is is things like innovation start with the individual. They start with people that are willing to try things, even if you're not affirmed in your environment, because many people don't feel empowered and affirmed, right? They feel pretty stifled and siloed. But even in those environments, you can do experiments on even the microest level. And so, what I would encourage people to do is start where you are, start with what you have, start to learn, start to experiment, and start to share what you learn, because that
Yeah.
tends to create more opportunities. So rather than expect this huge systemic change in your organization or your industry, which may take years and years and years and needs to happen, but it's a long term play, start with
Yeah.
that micro thing you can do even this afternoon.
Yeah, I love that. So, well, thank you so much for being here. How can people get a hold of you or reach out to you if they want to learn more?
Well, always love to connect with people and do follows on LinkedIn. So feel free to look me up under Jon Hirst. Or my website is simply innovationinmission.com. Love to
Love
have
that.
people connect there.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Thanks for being on the show.
Been great to be with you, Catherine.
Thanks for listening to Designing for Equity. If you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with a friend or colleague. You can also sign up for my newsletter for more tools and insights at theresourcefullawyer.com. On LinkedIn, be sure to connect with me there too. And thanks for joining me in pursuit of equity.